Thank you very much, Stephen. Can everyone hear me okay? Can you hear me okay at the back? We're good? Okay, so the session description is here, and so what I'm going to do in the 45 minutes we have is I want to talk a little bit about the Hamilton Public Library context. Then I want to sort of answer the question by looking at what I see as two basic IT or laws, technology laws, 7 strategies to future-proof our library's technology, and finally 5 useful frameworks that I personally couldn't do without. The slides have been loaded on the website. I did them. I've actually updated them a bit, so I think either later today or tomorrow I will upload nothing's been taken away. I just added some slides, so you don't need to take notes. So a little bit about Hamilton. We're located at the western edge of Lake Ontario, about an hour from Buffalo. Our population is 550,000, and it's a very large area. It's actually 439 square miles, consisting of urban, suburban, and rural areas. And the Hamilton Public Library was founded in 1889, and we went through a municipal amalgamation in 2001. And so we were really born in 2001. And currently our annual operating budget is about $32 million. Stephen had mentioned my predecessor. Ken Roberts was the previous chief librarian. And just a little bit about our context. We've been going through long-term innovation at the Hamilton Public Library. And there were several papers that my predecessor produced. It was actually 3 papers on meeting user needs. And the last one he did was in 2010 called Thoughts on Our Next Decade. So in 2017, we were working with the library board to build our strategic plan. And so what we did was we did some research and we looked at the old assumptions. And instead, we previously had 8 assumptions about moving forward, and we have now them down to 5. And I suggest this because it's important to have a picture, an assumption about where you think things are going. This helps with working with a board, but also with staff in kind of understanding the context we work in. And just a general observation, if you look at the 2010 assumptions versus the 2017, they're somewhat more optimistic because some of the sort of challenges addressed in 2010 have actually we've overcome those challenges. For example, you'll see there on the right, it says, more library buildings require renovations than our funding will allow. At the time, we had 6 branches that were deemed unsuitable to ever be able to be made accessible and brought up to current standards. We're now down to 1. So we've made a lot of progress on that. So we tried to balance sort of the recognition that we actually have made progress on a lot of these things. So I think in many ways our 5 planning assumptions are hopeful or more hopeful. The first one is really just about disruptive change and the need for resiliency. The second one speaks to competition for funding. The third one is actually something that is really a positive message about public libraries well positioned to contribute to the health, education, and prosperity of the communities we serve. And then we somewhat updated our approach to the digital shift, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, so I don't want to go into too much detail there. And I think the other thing, when we looked at, in 2010, we said privacy, intellectual property issues will become more complex. Well, we certainly added in network security, and I think we all know, say over the last 5 years, how much more important network security, and the threats out there than there were in the past. So those are links to the documents, the full documents. Each one of those assumptions has an expanded explanation of what we mean. And this has been very helpful. So So if we're going to talk about my perspective on technology, I'm thinking about how we can use technology to make sure these 5 assumptions, planning assumptions we have, that we're making progress and moving forward. So where is technology going? And as someone that spent about 20 years implementing technology, the one that really strikes me, we could talk about so many different trends. The most basic one, and it was called Moore's Law, but then Ray Kurzweil had expanded it to call the law of accelerating returns. And you may not agree with all of Kurzweil's conclusions, but so where it's going, we might disagree with, but I think the underlying assumption that price, performance, bandwidth, and capacity of information technology progresses exponentially through multiple paradigm shifts. And so the implication for us as libraries is that the technologies that we can provide are going to become more affordable and available, and that they're going to evolve more rapidly. And so that the life cycle of major technology change will get shorter, not longer. And if you look at what exponential growth in the 21st century of technology means, in the 21st century, instead of 100 years of technology progress, we're actually going to go through 20,000 years of progress. And, you know, it sounds kind of crazy, and it is kind of crazy, but it is actually real. And things are starting to move more quickly. And if we think things are going to slow down, we're missing the point. Things are not going to slow down. So, and then, has anyone here heard of Jacob Nielsen? You know, he's written about web usability, and I was the second web coordinator for the branch libraries of New York Public Library back in 1994, I guess it was. And I was a big fan of Jacob Nielsen's. And remember his first law of web user experience? People spend more time on other people's sites, and that's where they form their expectations for how your site should work. It's very simple. And so I've kind of adapted that in terms of my thinking to say the law of customer expectations. It's not just about a web thing. Customers spend more time experiencing service and technology outside of our organization. And that is where they form their expectations for how our systems and services should work. I think it's very simple. You know, and I'm sure you see it, I see it every day. As people's expectations change through their experiences, their expectations for what we do change as well. So we need to recognize that. And so if you look at the key implication there's sort of a warning and then an opportunity. The warning is customers' expectations of how our services and technology should work will change at a more rapid rate. I think that's a fair assumption, and certainly in my career in the last 20 years plus, I've seen that. But the other one is people will need help keeping up with the changes that are happening around them. And so this is where an opportunity presents itself for libraries. If you're in a public library, helping your community stay connected, stay up to date, stay orientated with current technology is a huge opportunity for us. Okay, so, and these next 7 slides or 8 slides are from a document that I prepared when I became CEO. I wrote this kind of vision that I gave to my person that was taking on after me about what strategies do we need to take for technology. And so I revisited them 6 years later. I've made a few changes, but I think I actually still think the fundamentals here are accurate. So the first one, I think this is very big if anyone's involved in technology, is we need to avoid unnecessary complexity. And, you know, I'll give you an example. So, this is a kind of an easy example. So we have an internet and we use SharePoint, and, you know, works very well. You can create these custom lists. And a number of years ago, I don't know, it was probably 10 years, if not longer, we had our incident reporting form. And I was technology at the time. I said, yeah, we can do it. Why don't we just do a a SharePoint list to manage this, and we can do that. So I go through and I talk to the directors, talk to the managers, talk to staff, and everyone wants so many fields in this form for staff to fill out. And I'm like, okay, guys, you have to understand, the more we make this complicated, the less we'll get compliance. The other thing is, if you make it too difficult, it won't work. So what I said, but it's hard to argue with people sometimes, especially when you're arguing with people that are more senior to you that are saying you need to do this. So I said, okay, this is what we're going to do. We'll put in all these fields. Then in 3 months' time, we're going to export. We're going to look at all of the results. And every field that hasn't been used, we're going to remove it. And if a field has 1 or 2 people have filled it in, we'll transfer that information to another field. And so everything will be captured. But all these requirements of people that you're saying we need this information, if no one's filling it out, why make the form more complicated? And we did that, and I think it's been very successful. But I think the underlying premise here is that, and this goes for public, but also goes for staff, is if you have a complicated process, people won't be able to navigate it. So we need to avoid complexity or at least hide it. And so there's such a desire for technology to solve process problems. And my answer is, let's make sure our technology is simple, and let's program it for the 80 or 90%, and then let's deal with exceptions offline or through a people process, as opposed to trying to ram 100% of all the exceptions into the system. Because then what happens is it gets more complicated and people don't follow it. So to me, simplicity in technology implementation is a core element of success. So that would be my first strategy. This next one, it kind of goes into, is avoid being boxed in. And this is very simple, and the next slide, I think I'm going to be talking about cloud services. It's great we can move to the cloud, it's great we can do all these other things, but we need to make sure that we have an exit path. I don't want to ever get involved in a technology road that's going to take me where now my hands are tied and I'm not going to be able to move in another direction. We talk about best of breed. The first point I make here, which I think we need to keep in mind, never underestimate the importance of maintaining a highly skilled and knowledgeable IT workforce. That is so important in order of having an exit path. If you don't have people that know what's going on and understand the technology, then you're more likely to be have less options in terms of moving forward. And obviously, one big way of doing this, and we need to collectively all commit to adhering to standards and working together, and we need to have a viable exit path. Pretty simple, but I think it's something that we just need to keep in mind. The third one is, and this could be embrace the cloud, take advantage of available services. Any IT task that we have to do that doesn't add value, if we can get rid of it, that creates the capacity for us to do other things. And I've said that it's interesting when you try to say, let's implement this new technology so we can focus our efforts elsewhere. And then what I'll sometimes hear from IT people are 2 things. Oh no, we shouldn't move to that system. We're just fine because we're just fine. It's working fine. And then it's like, okay, well, we need to work on this new project. Oh, we don't have the time. Okay, we don't have the time to do that. So it's like, okay, so you want to keep the system that you're adding that's adding work to your thing, but you don't have time to do critical things that we need to do. So it's not about trying to outsource or take work away from IT, but it's about, if there's a simple solution that we can leverage, let's leverage it so we can work on other things. And what is one of the most important things that we can work on as an IT department is promoting staff technology system-wide. You know, and we have in our mandate we have a digital technology infrastructure department and digital technology services department that supports staff training, that supports public training. Ideally, our DT services staff are working they're working to help hand off things so more public service staff can do. But we know with this rapid changing technology, there's always going to be more need for staff development. And I think the thing that for me is, we need to know that, and I have this story where I was manager at the time. This may have been, I don't know, around 2007. We did a survey around the system about how are we doing. And guess what people wrote down comments? We want someone from IT, time we call electronic services, to be at our branch all the time. Okay, we have 22 branches. So I'm there. Well, you know what we could do? We could lay off 22 people, and we could take new IT positions and put them around the system. And then, you know, people are looking at me like, that's not going to happen. Of course it's not going to happen. Okay, so what are we going to do instead? We're going to, as an IT department, work on promoting technical competencies. And I think one thing that IT has going for it, you know, okay, I'll talk about this. But one thing IT has going for it is if you understand technology, you know, we talk about, say, look at this laptop. Okay, is it at all similar to a tablet? Well, what's similar? Well, from an IT standpoint, it's got an input device, it's got an output device, it's got a power source, it's got a network connection. And so if we can get people thinking in patterns, as I do, and also getting people, our public service staff, to report IT problems better, we're going to be more effective. You know, and so as much of our training needs to be, and this is this first one, I think this is really critical, as much of our training needs to be not about training people, staff on specific systems, but on the patterns that exist in different systems, so they're developing transferable skills. You know, I like to put it this way. How many of us have ever been into a building we've never seen before, and we've had to find the washroom? Has anyone been there? You know, we've all been there. Have we ever not found the washroom? If there is one, and if it's not locked, we do. Why? Because we know what cues to look for. It's just the same with technology, so we need to think in that way. We need to encourage staff to consume all of our services online so that they're downloading ebooks, that they're doing these other services themselves personally, so when they're asking for help, when customer asks for help, they have personal experience with that. And I think this one, and this I learned it from New York, developing some of our first internet training that we did. You know, one of the best tools to get a public service staff member to improve their technical competency and confidence is get them to train on something. Get them to train the public on something. Because that forces you to learn things, and it also, and if you can do it, it improves your confidence. So I think that's very important. Collaboration with other libraries in the public sector is so important. I'm going to move a little bit faster here because I'm looking at the time. Avoid bleeding edge. Okay. You know, and I think one thing I would say, and I think this is very important, you know, we can get flashy changes, get fleeting attention. Meaningful changes that have lasting results lead to lasting positive support. So we shouldn't spend our time focusing on the new and flashy. We should focus our time on making sure we're moving forward. And you know, we're a library. Libraries of different sizes. We're not Google. We don't have gazillions of dollars to put in our in R&D. So we need to be smart about how we use technology. And so we should be trying things out and pilot when they're perhaps in the impractical stage. and then implementing when they're in the possible stage. What we don't want to do is put too many resources into things that don't work yet. Doesn't mean we shouldn't experiment and pilot. The other thing we don't want to do is we don't want to wait till we've missed the boat, until people are coming in and it's now expected or even required. And an example of this might be, I know when I became CEO in 2012, we looked around, there were, in 2012, we had some of our smaller branches still didn't have the ability for people to pay with a debit card or a credit card. We didn't have those machines. Why don't we? Well, because they were too expensive when we looked at it 5 years ago. It's like, what kind of message are we telling our customers if they come into the library and we're so antiquated we don't have enable them to pay by debit? And so in that case, we were too late. I'd say we did it, but what I'd say is it's never too late. But what you want to be is you don't want people coming in and looking, you do that still? You know, that's what you want to try to avoid. At the same time, you don't have to spin your wheels going crazy trying to make the impossible practical in an environment where you have constrained resources. So this last one, it's just a point about, you know, we need to think in shorter cycles and we need to be agile. So let's not try to solve the problems of the world and then go about implementing it. If we have too long of a project cycle, what ends up happening is we're solving either yesterday's problem, or even if we're solving today's problem, it might be with yesterday's technology. So we need to do that, and there's some great work out there. So we need to have business planning processes that keep us moving forward incrementally, and we also need to leave some capacity in our business planning process so that we can take advantage of easy wins that emerge. So 5 useful frameworks that I have, and I'm going to just have to go through these very quickly. The first one is systematic evaluation. You know, it's about understanding patterns and telling our stories. And the point of this is that our one ongoing constraint is we can't see the future. If you can see the future, you know, good for you. I certainly can't, and I don't try to. But what I do is try to make sure we get enough information and systematic information coming in so we're making informed choices. We're going to have less time to respond to changes. So if we have less time to respond to changes, we can't wait 6 months to get the data. We need to get it more quickly. And that's a long journey. It takes time. The public service value chain is very important, and it's all about employee engagement. And these, look at that list. I use the one on the left, those 6. Look at that, and one thing what I found when I became chief librarian is number 5 was one that was a problem in our environment, career path that offers opportunities for advancement. And so we've tried to work on things like that. There's different ways, it's a lot of information out there, but if you don't have an engaged staff, you're not going to get customer satisfaction. You need to have a good change management strategy, and I'm a big fan of Peter DeJager's. He uses the Kubler-Ross levels of grief cycle to analyze organizational change. And I encourage you to take a look at, I've been using this for a long time, and it works great. It works great with implementing technology, but it's about ethical and honest conversations. And so, you know, one thing is, and he'll ask the question, you know, people understand bullshit, and I think it's true. And so with them, don't try to bullshit people. You know, tell them the truth. And the one thing, if you look at what's read, and this was the one thing that I learned from him, which is don't get buy-in for a solution. You got to get buy-in for realizing the need for change. And if you do that, everything else comes easier. Are people familiar with the collaboration continuum? So this comes from work done by the Tamarack Institute in Canada and others. But if you look at this continuum, do we work in a how far are we on the spectrum of turf versus trust? And, you know, we have great partnerships externally. I always say to my staff, if we don't live it internally, how can we ever think that we're going to be able to externally be collaborative? So we need to make sure we collaborate. And so you can look at, you might start at compete, well, maybe you move to cooperate. It depends on the circumstance, but this is a very useful framework. And I guess the last one, I always love this, and this influenced me, which is the OCLC's report, Positioning for Support. And, you know, this was from 2007, and there's a new one out now. But you look at those, if the library is about information, we're in trouble. But if the library is about transformation, that's good. And, you know, if we're an institution or infrastructure, and I think the question is, how can we position ourselves about being about the future if our tech is bad? Bad tech makes us seem like we're about the past, not about the present or future. So I think that's important. And so finally, I just, and it's 2:30, right? So we'll have some time for questions. So if you ever, so all my experience as a CEO, what have I learned? Well, I did learn that understand technology is very helpful for me in my job. But what I'd say is more important is learning how to really collaborate and work from a place of influence and mutual respect rather than power is critical. All the projects I worked on being a tech, you know, trying to get people to implement systems, especially, you know, often you're working where you're reporting to a manager or a director and, you know, you're trying to implement something that works, and it can be difficult, but it's that collaboration. And if you're in authority and you work in that way, you get a lot more successful. We need to ensure that technology we implement is both useful and used. It needs to be both. If it's useful but no one uses it, it's not really having an impact. And you know, when I've said this, novelty attracts temporary attention. I want to focus on successful implementations that have long-term impacts. Technology innovation without a successful change management strategy will not lead to good results. And are people here familiar with ITIL, IT infrastructure? It's great. And you know, when I talk about change management, this is not about like the CAB process. And I think the CAB process is great. And in fact, at HPL, we use the ITIL CAB process for a change management board that doesn't just deal with IT, it deals with IT, facilities, communications. We're small enough that we could have one CAB board to do those changes. You need that too, but a change management strategy is about the communicating the future and working with people to get there together. One of the things that we like to say is we need to avoid spasms of enthusiasm. What works is progress, steady progress, and that's what we need to focus on. And the last point I'd like to make is using technology to create capacity over time works. We need to be patient. But I've scratched out there, save money. You know, we have saved a lot of money by implementing technology, but it's not a very exciting message. Oh, let's implement this, this technology so we can save money, so we can, you know, reduce staff or something like that. No one's going to be enthusiastic about that. But if the alternative is we're committed to not laying anyone off and we're committed to using the resources to expand service, that's a different thing. So we're using the innovation not to save money, we're using it to create capacity to meet current and future needs. And that works a lot better. And I think the other thing that's really critical here is we need to each one of us in our own roles with whatever influence we have, we need to take ownership for shifting resources from how they're currently spent to the way they need to be. And this should happen over time. But you know what happens is it's like somehow In the past, there was, you know, we're going to spend X on this. And somehow it's now like a Bible. Okay, we're going to put that money always, and if anyone questions that, it's a bad thing. You know, the world changing too much, and one of the things I always say is, when we make a change, we're not criticizing anyone's past decisions. People made decisions based on the best information and effort they had. So let's respect that. But we need to recognize that circumstances change and opportunities change. And so it's up to us to take advantage of that in a way that we build on the great work that people before us have done. I have some other slides that I'll be, we can open up for questions, but I've just put some additional information there for you that they'll be loaded. But I think it's 2:19, so we have about 11 minutes for questions. Yes.
Could you elaborate a little bit more about the bioprotection path? Because I know a lot of the marketing guys are out there, they talk, they all say,
Yes.
you know, they're interoperable, that take your data and all that. Can you feel more extensive about what it means to have a bioprotection path?
Sure, I think that's it. Did everyone hear the question? He's asking for me to expand on having a reliable exit path. And I think it's a great question. And so I guess how I look at it is there's things, okay, we're right now taking over community information services because the agency that done it has gone out of business. So we have this data. Can we export it? Can we create, you know, a mechanism so that we can export it? And even if we now have to put another interface over top of it, can we make sure that all that data is preserved? So that's a very basic thing. I think the other thing is it's always what standards do systems adhere to? And so when we look at that, it's a fairly objective thing. And I think what we need to do, though, we also need to not, so how standards-based is this system? And if it is, okay, you know what, we should be able to work with it. I think those would be two of the top ones for me. And I think the other thing is trust and the relationship too. You know, let's deal with vendors that have a good reputation, that you know, we've worked with, that, you know, have a, you know, they're not shady. And so I guess those would be a few things. I'd be interested, I'm sure some people here probably have a more complete answer than I do. That's fairly high level. But, you know, we've gone through several migrations and you know, it's standards-based, make sure you can get the data out.
Questions back? Yes, Paul, you mentioned skill level and training and knowledge in your IT department. I'm an IT manager at a library, and it's always a challenge to me, have been so far at least, to get enough staff. To get enough staff to be able to adequately manage technology. What was this with the 22 branches?
Yes.
What was the size of the staff?
So, and maybe Sherry, our Director of Digital Technology, is here. So we have two departments, and how many in total FTEs?
20, including the two managers.
And those are all support infrastructure? I mean, you
There,
divided it into
as Paul said, we have an infrastructure group and services group. So the infrastructure is more dealing with the back end, the hardware, the Polaris, some of the development elements, and the service group is dealing more around programming, training, maker spaces. They run the maker spaces, especially the big ones, introducing new technologies.
Yes. So the thing is, so our FTE count is right now, well, 299, 300. At amalgamation was 320. So we haven't added to our overall complement, but those were positions that were in the past, and this is through attrition. No one's been laid off in over a decade, but CERC clerk positions that don't exist anymore. Those have been turned into these digital services positions. We used to have a quick information department that I managed that was interlibrary loan. Some of those functions went to different departments, but we kept those positions and transformed them into technology support positions. So, and I think that's where you need to look at. And one thing about our strategy that I think has been very successful is we have some jobs where we create, how do you create a path for existing staff? Because if the issue here is that if you need to bring someone in with skills, then ultimately somewhere in your complement, you know, if you're not expanding it, that's one less job for someone that's existing in the system. And you're going to need to sometimes bring in outside people. So what we did is we have LAs, like library assistants, that have a bachelor's degree. What we did was we looked and found A+ certification, which is the easiest IT certification you get first level access at a help desk. And we have jobs, so we added that as a qualification. So now we have all these smart young people that are working at the library that have a college, university degree. Hey, you want a job in technology? Get your A+ certification. And at least it shows that you have an aptitude for the technology. So you're not, these people aren't going to be hard infrastructure, but they're going to be competent trainers and competent in providing service desk support. And so I like, that has really worked out well. It's not perfect, but you know, because for me, if we can give a path forward for existing staff, and that was one of the, employee engagement pillars that we weren't doing the best on. So now we have that. So you need to give a path for people to move forward.
For some context, Paul's process also involves strategically deciding when they can use city services where it isn't critical to your path. So that
sure.
you have partnerships, so there's additional bandwidth on things that don't matter to the library, but
right.
the city can handle.
So we're in the cities. We're on their network. They provide our network layer. That we actually share a data center that's located in the library, and we're on their PeopleSoft financial system. But we have our own IT department, and we maintain our autonomy, but we work together. So we actually were on their Outlook server, but we've migrated to Office 365, so we're now in the cloud. So we look at it case by case. And I think it's really important, though, that relationship has worked well, but it's a hybrid, you know, it's kind of a hybrid, and it takes more work. You know, if you're taken over by your IT, you don't need to communicate because they're going to do whatever the hell they want, okay? If you don't have any relationship with them, you don't really need to communicate because you're not working with them, okay? But if you have this hybrid relationship, the need for communication goes up. But overall, it lets us focus on important things. And there
also, before he became CEO, led a transition strategy where the previous CEO was able to free up a few $100,000 out of overpayments to the pension plan when they merged all the pension plans and all the unions in a couple of dozen cities or towns. Mm-hmm. And so as a result of that, they could negotiate with their union saying they need to hit this technology marker by this date or you cannot stay in your position because you're not qualified for it anymore. So there's a finely tuned transition strategy
yes.
to make sure the staff had the capacity to achieve what the library wanted.
So basically our former circulation clerks, and there's a lot of them have retired now, but these jobs don't exist. So we made them information clerks on the condition that they got 8 courses at our local community college for library techniques diploma. It wasn't perfect, but if we didn't do that, it would have been, it's sort of a disaster. But I think the other thing that we do, and this is really important to our strategy, which is every single time a job comes up, it requires senior leadership team approval to repost the position. And so, because this is why a slow path is more successful, I think, or a pace path, is that if I have to create 5 new jobs or lay off 5, it's a nightmare. But if I can say, okay, this year we need to look at adding 2 positions over here, what we're going to do is, we're going to look for when someone retires, okay, now we can, but it takes time. But if you stay on that, you find yourself 5, 10 years later where it's normal part of the process. But people aren't getting laid off, people aren't getting disrupted. You're creating a positive path forward for people that want to embrace these new opportunities. So it's an important strategy. They are, and we have a good level of trust with them because and even our infrastructure people are unionized, and so, but it's never been a problem, and I mean, problems are minor, I guess I would say, but you know they take their professional responsibility very seriously, and yeah, so it's and it's one area where we bring in new staff because they're such strong, skilled. We've lost a lot of our best web developers to the city. And one of the downsides of us being close with the city is we talk to them and then they see, geez, your developers are like better than ours. Next thing you know, they're going to the city where they're getting paid more money and they have more opportunity to progress. But from my perspective, if we get a good few years out of these brilliant programmers and they move on, then it's a win-win. It's a win for them, it's a win for us, and it's good that we have smart people rising up in city IT that have a deep respect for what we do. And I think that that's important as well.
Time for another short question.
I work in a public library and respond to a board that is really not even in the 20th century. Tell me about how you sell a very complex strategy like this to somebody who doesn't understand?
You know, it's a very good question, and I think part of it, what we do, so we have that agreement, the rules, the long-term patterns, assumptions, we get them to agree to that. We don't go into a lot of detail with our board about specific operational issues, but they do understand that we need to maintain our investment in technology so we can keep moving forward. And so, you know, it's kind of an ongoing struggle and relationship. One of the things that I've done, and when, you know, I was a new CEO, it's a different relationship, a new CEO than an experienced one, where they've had a long time, but, you know, some things we do, we're trying to plan better, and we also do have this, it's just a little thing where we have first review, second review for everything we take to the board. So we do a report, to do not everything, but anything that we're asking them to make a decision on, whether it be a policy or funding or a new opportunity, we take a report. Here's a draft report for review and comment. And so then you talk about it, they ask their questions, any concerns, you know, you do that. We're going to bring this back next month for you to approve it. And I can tell you what happens. 80% of the time when we have a consent agenda. Are there any changes to what? No, not really, or we did some minor things. Okay, just put it on consent. Okay, so it's kind of, and I think for boards, you need to help them, but you need to make sure you're not backing them into a corner. And then maybe one last thing, we try to get fines with children eliminated. We haven't got there yet, and I think we would have got it passed, but it wouldn't have been a strong consensus. So what we decided to do, here are all these other changes we're going to make, and we're going to come back to that one next year. You know, so sometimes you need, yes, you know, so we're talking about, yeah, but no, but the thing is, and you know what, I think part of it is I do respect their authority, and ultimately it is their decision. And so if I've been on boards, I don't want to be rushed to make a decision. I want to be well informed and I want to be respected. And if you do that, okay, over time, and people, they open up. I'm 90% confident that we're going to be able to get rid of children's fines before the end of this year. But, you know, but we're going to do it not with a divided board. We're going to have strong consensus. That doesn't mean unanimous consensus, but it means, you know, like of 12 people on the board, or 11 people on the board, you know, you have 9 that are in agreement.